You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker, and this is episode 52 of the show, and this time we're going to talk about Bill Moran, and we've been saying that we would do this for a long, long time. We've actually tried to do it at least once, had a bunch of scheduling issues, ran into a major technical snafu, so thank goodness we're finally going to get this one together. So make sure we have everybody here. We'd like to tell everybody who's with us. Usually it's the full crew each show. That's myself. We also have Mr. Michael Birch.
Here.
And we have Mr. Tom Krein.
Hey, guys.
And we have Mr. Sean Kendrick.
Hey, hey.
There he is. All right. And so this time, much like when we did the Loveless episode, we had David Sharp join us as kind of a voice of expertise on Loveless work. We have a special guest joining us this time, a guy who I think is safe to say is very much a rock star knife maker of his own, and that's Mr. Jay Hendrickson. Jay,
Hi.
Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks,
right.
Jay.
So Jay's someone that worked with Bill for a bunch of years, and we'll get into all of that stuff and more. One of the reasons we do these history episodes kind of to try to help people understand where stuff came from in some cases. In every case so far, it's been important history that we think people need to understand when they look at knives currently, because there's constantly new people coming into the knife thing. And we think it's important to make sure that people understand the history and where things came from. So Bill Moran is our next point in that timeline that we want to go through. So in the Gun Digest Book of Knives, 4th edition from 1992, which is a great reference book that our friend Bobby Branton sent to me a while ago. There's an excellent article in there called The Master of the Forge, written by B.R. Hughes. And so I wanted to give a quote from B.R. Hughes about Bill Moran. It goes, "America has been blessed with a significant number of truly great bladesmiths during the current century, including the likes of Bill Skagel, Rudy Ruana, Bo Randall, Pete Heath, and Don Hastings. As significant as the achievement of this group of giants may be, they pale in comparison to the contributions made by W.F. Bill Moran, Jr., who over a span of 50-plus years has dominated the field of bladesmithing as no man has ever before or probably ever will again." So, Jay, I think you're probably on board with that sentiment from BR, right?
Absolutely. As you were reading it, it just reminds me that my opinion and opinion of many others, probably Bill Hughes also, that Bill Moran was probably the most important bladesmith, most famous bladesmith of the 20th century. And he certainly will go down in history as one of the best, for sure. And you can't discount Bill Hughes, too, his effort on the board of directors and founding the American Bladesmith Society along with Bill, that he had an awful lot to do with the success of bladesmithing also in all his writings.
Yeah, very prolific guy when it comes to writing, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right, so I mentioned, Jay's a extremely accomplished knife maker in his own right. He's an ABS mastersmith and has made knives for many, many years. And so I think part of what we'd like to do is sort of start with Jay, because Jay's the guy that's going to help fill in the blanks for us on Bill Moran. And I think it's important for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work to kind of know a little bit more about you. So, Jay, why don't you tell us, we always do this with knife makers. Take us back to where you grew up and kind of what your life was as a young man, as a kid.
Okay, those were fun days for sure. Long time before television.
Right.
I lived very close to the woods, spent most of my time there, and we were about 100 yards from the Susquehanna River, so a lot of fishing on the river and a lot of outdoor activity like that with my friends.
Whereabouts, what part of the
This
Northeast
is northern Pennsylvania in Susquehanna County. It's also the city of Susquehanna, Susquehanna County on the Susquehanna River.
There you go.
And it's an old railroad town, and That's where I grew up. And so being in the woods most of the time, every day, we, as boys, fooled around with making our bows and our arrows and throwing knives at different things, objects in the woods. And I guess as the days went on, got a little older and got into shooting BB guns, and like most boys did back then.
Yeah.
It was just a transition from there into bows and arrows, and pretty soon at 22, and about 10 years old, wandering the woods with a 22 shooting squirrels. A love of hunting, a love of nature, and along with that came the love of knives. Made a few as a kid, but never really too serious until I got older. But of course, I got married and raised a family and had to work. I worked for IBM. About 1972, fast forward, is when I really decided I wanted to make knives. So I started out stock removal because I didn't have a lot of equipment. I just had a little 1-inch grinder I bought from Sears and Roebuck. It seemed like it took forever to grind a knife, but seemed to get it done. And I did that from 72 until really the early 80s. And along that time frame, I had met Bill Moran in 1972 also. But I could only get over there for a couple hours on a Saturday, seeing as I worked every day. And but I got to know him and kind of watched what he was doing. And a little bit later, he had made a knife for me for a Christmas present that my wife had ordered, and that must have been about 83, I would think.
Okay.
And after that, we became real good friends. And along came the NRA, who had invited Bill to go up to Rochester Institute of Technology to teach bladesmithing, the first course in the country. And Bill had been doing hammer-ins around up in New York State and Ashokan and places like that, Peters Valley, 3-day hammer-ins. And so he had some experience in that area of teaching. So Bill had asked me if I would like to join him. So I got permission from my boss at work, and I went up there for 2 weeks and took the basic bladesmithing course. It was the first one in the country.
Wow. 2 weeks is a big commitment to go take 2 weeks off and go do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my wife wasn't too happy about that. Since I only got 3 weeks vacation a year,
Yeah, right.
She went along with it.
Yeah.
And so up I went. But I was like a sponge. I just knew enough about knife making, being a stock removal guy. I knew how to finish knives, what have you, but I didn't understand the forging process. And I was, like I say, like a sponge. And it just hit me. A bell went off, lights went on and off and what have you. And I said, oh, my God, I know what I'm going to be doing from now on. And so Bill helped me out quite a lot, get me started. And I started buying equipment and I got very involved. Got very involved with the ABS and its school, and Bill was the first chairman for 15 years, and then I was on the board of directors in '86, and they made me the second president, and I just got involved and tried to help them administratively, write the rules for the journeymen and the masters, and get it all documented. And we were on a roll. Things were happening real fast, and the society was growing real quick. And they always tell a funny joke, BR and Bill, about starting the society back in '76. They thought if they could find 25 guys, they would be very successful. And that went by in a hurry. We got quite a few members real quick. I don't know how many masters there are now, probably about 115 or 20, 25, something like that. It's an interesting process, and with the schools that are happening out there, we got about 5 different schools around the country, teaching a lot of people how to forge knives. So, they protected the art form, and that's what Bill always wanted this to be, as an art form. I believe it is today. And,
yeah.
So,
what about those first knives, Jay, that you made as a kid? Were those were those knives that you like made with files and stuff? Or?
The first one was a putty knife that I took from my dad.
Oh, wow.
I used to recarve that and used to throw that around in the woods, what have you. I still have it. It's interesting. It's got
really?
I would burn the date in it, 1946.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think I was like 9 years old. And then I made one for a friend of mine, and I forgot all about it until I went to a high school reunion, and he says, I still got that knife you made for me.
Oh, geez.
In 1949, I think it was. And I said, what knife? And he says, well, I keep it up in my drawer, so in my dresser drawer. So we went up, and he pulled this knife out, and I looked at it, and I said, oh, my God. I couldn't hardly remember, but the more I looked at it, it sort of all came back. So,
wow.
We fooled around with stuff like that. And of course, knives were so cheap in the hardware store, you could buy one, a Western or something like that for about $3. So It wasn't out of reach to be able to buy a really good knife. And so, it was in my mind, I guess, all these years. And being I like to hunt and what have you, I guess it just all of a sudden fell in place.
It seems like that's a really common theme with knife makers when we do these interviews. We kind of rotate the show, right? Sometimes we'll talk about a topic, and other times we'll do interviews with knife makers, current guys that are out there. Either sometimes they're new people, and those are kind of interesting stories, right? Because they're just getting started, or maybe they're part-time and they haven't gone full-time yet. And then we talk to some other guys like Bob Terzola, right? Guys that have done it for a long time like you. And it's really interesting because in almost every case, that love of knives goes back pretty far. They find that spark in many cases, not all, but in many cases, they find that very early in life. And it's really cool to kind of hear that common theme, even knowing that all these guys came from different parts of the country and different backgrounds. And it's pretty cool to see. Yeah. So you mentioned growing up by the river. It sounds like you guys lived in the country a little bit. Did your family have a farm, or was your dad a professional guy, or what was your situation at home?
No, my dad was a plumber, and we actually lived in a little town. It's just that the woods were real close, that's all.
Okay.
There was three cities there on both sides of the river, and I guess totally in the best days, there was only 2,000 people, railroad town, so it wasn't a crowded area at all, but being the river was so close, we always had boats or canoes and spent a lot of time there fishing, what have you, and the woods were, like I say, right across the street from me, and we tree houses and camps in the woods and things like that as kids. It was a great life. Before TV, so there wasn't much to do indoors. You had to be outdoors, and Mom didn't mind that at all for me to get the heck out of the house, for the day. No. And it was funny because, you just leave and you might come home for lunch or maybe not, It wasn't concerned about kids back then,
It's different.
At all. And I mean, we were jumping in the river and swimming when we were probably 8 years old,
Right.
And not worrying. People just didn't worry about things like that like they do today.
I think Michael's talked about having that similar experience, right? Of kind of you disappear in the morning and you got a BB gun or a 22 or something, and you're basically with your pals all day.
My pal was my dog, though.
Yeah.
Well, I always pride myself on my 22. I gave my 22 to my son. It was actually a First World War training 22. My dad had it. Savage, and he gave it to me, a little bolt action. And when I would go squirrel hunting, I don't think I ever shot a squirrel any place but right in the head. and when I moved to Maryland, I realized everybody was hunting squirrels with shotguns, and I just never had even given that a thought.
Right.
We always shot with 22s. I always prided myself on that I was able to do that. It was a very accurate gun because I was in high school. I was on the rifle team, and got pretty good with it at that time.
Yeah. Different times, right? Like you said.
Yeah, different times, yeah. Walking down a hallway in school with a 22 Savage strapped to my back and a pocket full of shells, going to my locker,
Yeah. Yep.
Never happened today.
No, different times for sure. Yeah. And like you said, different times from the perspective of kids kids today, right? This is an old guy speech, right? But kids nowadays, many of them don't have that experience. Some still do, but many of them don't have that experience of going and spend the day in the woods or out with your friends on your bikes all day long, or, you know what I mean? Just being away and doing your own thing.
Yeah. Well, back up to Bill, he was the same way. His farm was on the Monocacy River, and he trapped and caught skunks and, furs and muskrat and things like that.
Yeah.
And even up into, oh my Lord, up until the 90s, he was still reloading all his shells and,
oh yeah,
shotgun shells. And
Very
he
cool.
got into a lot of things, air pistols and crossbows and all kinds of stuff, at a later date even, Muzzle loaders, my Lord, he used to build those early on. And so, very much a craftsman.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
So on your timeline, we talked about your early time and kind of growing up, having that outdoor experience and being an outdoor person who loved it, and you kind of embraced all of what came with it, right? So that means whether it's fishing or hunting or whatever, it's kind of all part of a big, I don't know, what I think of as like an outdoors kind of background. And so how did you end up as a guy at IBM coming out of that situation?
Well, IBM started in Endicott, New York, and a friend of mine wanted to go down and take an interview and asked me if I wanted to go along, and I did, and I'd already been in the service. This is 1957, so I went down and I actually filled out an application. They hired me. So
wow.
It was kind of interesting. I didn't think I would qualify for that, but I did get a job, and I stayed with them for 30 years. And I moved down into Maryland during the Vietnam War on doing a top secret job. And I was in transportation, shipping computers around, mostly over in Vietnam for everything over there.
Yeah.
And so I spent 50 years in Frederick, Maryland, and that's where Bill was, over in Middletown, just over the mountain.
Okay.
And
so your thing at IBM was like logistics and movement of material. Is that kind of your specialty with IBM?
Well, it was for the first 15 years. And then I got into telecommunications. They wanted to move me up, so I took a different job. And I was in management, both in transportation and telecommunications, and until I retired in 1987. I actually took an early retirement to make knives. I had a daughter, a junior in high school, wanted to go to college, and she was my second daughter. And my wife was a little concerned that we wouldn't be making enough money to put her to college. But Nancy was working, so that helped out a lot. And I never looked back. I told her I'd go dig ditches if I had to, make money. Don't worry about it, and we never did. And,
that's very cool.
I just started doing a lot of shows and, bumping around with Moran, going to shows, and things were really happening quite regularly in the 80s with orders and what have you. So things were clicking right along. I did my first show in Tulsa. That's the first ABS show out there. And I remember I sold 7 knives, I believe. And I was just elated,
Oh,
maybe I sold them. Maybe I sold them too cheap. I don't know, but anyway, I was happy. And then the next year we went back. I think I sold 5. I might have those numbers reversed. I'm not positive, but things were good. And then you start to get recognized a little bit, and I went through the journeyman program and what have you. And Bill tested me for that. Tested me for masters, and got so involved with the ABS. I was on the board for 32 years. I just retired a couple years ago from that. Yeah. And just very involved. I stayed involved.
What year did you get your ABS Masters, Jay?
I got it in 1989.
89, okay.
And that was the first year that I taught out at school, because although the school had already been built and what have you, we weren't taking teachers unless they had their masters. So I was didn't get to go the first year of teaching. I went the second.
Okay.
So, and then I taught out there for about 13 years, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. I also taught up at Rochester. I went up there twice with Bill. I went back for Damascus a couple years later, 85, 86, around in there. And then the dean up there wanted me to come up, and I went up for 5 years and taught handles and guards up there. So I was getting weaned as a teacher also, as well as teaching basic bladesmithing and doing hammer-ins out in Washington, Arkansas.
Okay.
It was a blast. I had a lot of fun with it.
It sounds
The only problem I had was getting from Maryland to Arkansas every year. That was a tough one. A couple of times I was all by myself,
Yeah.
Long haul, but
Yeah.
we got her done.
I'm on the northwest corner of Arkansas, and the school is still like 6 hours from my shop.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the school now is at Texarkana.
Right.
It had to move because University of Arkansas took over the school. Our 30-year contract had come up and it wasn't renewed. Arkansas wanted to control it, so they have a school there now. I don't know how it's making out. It's a knife-making school, but I haven't heard any news on that. But I understand, talking to B.R. Hughes, and I did see some pictures in one of our the ABS magazine of the new school, and it looks really great. We have a whole building right on campus down there. So that's actually, it's working out pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's do this. I think we're at a spot where we kind of have some groundwork with Jay, right? So for people that aren't familiar with your work, this seems like a good spot to kind of switch over and kind of get into the Moran timeline and talk about his early life. And then it kind of merges with yours, right, Jay? I mean, you guys kind of connect partway through. So let's do that.
Okay.
Michael, you want to start us on the kind of the beginning of the timeline?
Yeah, Moran was born in 1925 in Frederick, Maryland. And supposedly he made his first knife at around 10 or 12. And what could you tell us about that, Jake? 'Cause I think you had some knowledge on.
Well, it's a cross-cut saw that I know. And he was 10 years old.
So he was actually 10 years old.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy. And what kind of knife was it?
Oh, gee, I don't know about that. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that.
Right.
Interesting one to find.
Yeah.
Now, he dropped out of school, and I guess there's some contention on whether he was dropped out or kind of was kicked out or kind of told not to come back.
You might just well tell the truth. He was asked to leave.
Yeah.
He was a wild guy at that age.
And why was he asked to leave? What was the situation there?
Well, it's just no interest, and probably raising Cain, with the principal.
Yeah.
Just didn't like school. The only thing he did like about school is he had a teacher that taught him how to read well and to understand history and read history, and he became prolific at that. He loved to read, and he was well versed. And we often talk in later years, questioning what his IQ might have been, because he seemed to be very smart on many, many topics.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was very interesting for a kid that dropped out of school at such an early age. He was interested in hunting and trapping and making knives at that time of year. He was strictly outdoors. He made himself a buckskin shirt, and he would walk down Market Street in Frederick, probably as a teenager, with a big buoy hanging off his side. Everybody thought he was crazy, Watch out for that man; he's dangerous, But that was Bill, He just he lived the way he wanted to live,
Now,
of course, he worked very hard because he had a farm there, 150 acres. He had 75 head of cattle. He had cows. He had to milk all the time, That got to be quite a job for him as he grew older.
Now, what are one of the ways that he let himself be told not to come back to school? There's an interesting story on how he
trapping
did that.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, he was a trapper, and the story goes, and it's written in our books, about him catching skunks that their hides weren't fit to be sold yet. They have to be pick them at a certain time of year, skin them a certain time of year. So he'd put them in a cage and he'd let them mature until the hides were right, and then he would do them in and skin them out. But he would go in there if he didn't want to go to school or want to raise some cane or go fishing or something. What do? He would go in there and he'd let a skunk smell get on him, and then he'd go to school, and of course they would release him right away, and then he'd head for the river. I think he did that more than once.
Right.
Yeah.
Method to his madness.
Yeah. Now, we have it written down that he was an active bladesmith. Now, is that correct, or was he a metalsmith at that time? Because there had to be a ton of local farm work and implement work to be done.
Well, I guess working on a farm, just imagine you're always repairing things.
Mm-hmm.
He probably became very handy at that, and he did build a forge right there out of an old silo that got blown down. And that building is still there. It's about ready to fall over.
Wow.
But I was over there about a year ago, and Roscoe Bartlett owns the property. He's our past congressman. He bought the farm from Bill and still lives there. And Roscoe told us that we could have his old forge. So we went over, a bunch of us, with a pickup truck, and we recovered that old forge, and we've refurbished it and painted it all up, and that's going to go into our new building. So I was real happy to get that forge. But meanwhile, that's what Bill had there to fix farm tools, I suspect, and make knives when he could,
Yeah. But it says here that he was making at 14. So he was actively a bladesmith and metalsmith, I'm sure, at that time. That's pretty crazy.
I would just call him a bladesmith. Absolutely. Yeah. He got into a lot of iron work. He felt he needed to do that once he built a shop years later to turn a dollar. He had to make money, so he would be fixing farm equipment over at his new shop and building iron work, like candelabras and andirons for fireplaces. We've got some in the museum, and I've seen many of them. I mean, they're beautifully done. And then he did other things too along the way. He built some tables with some ironwork attached to it, and he built dosmers. He built 3 dosmers. We have 2 of those in the museum, which, Bill would get an idea in his head, and he would just spin off, and for 6 months he would just concentrate on one thing,
Yeah.
Dosmers maybe, until he got it done, and then he's done with that, and he's on to something else. That's kind of how his mind thought worked. And I always get a kick because people ask me what Bill's favorite steel was to work with, and my answer to them has always been whatever steel he's working with at the time. That's the best steel. And although he did probably use W2 steel more than anything in the early days. But, yeah.
Still a great steel.
Oh yeah. What so that's a pretty good sized farm, and he wasn't from a big family, right, Jay?
No, he had one sister.
Wow.
His parents were pretty aristocratic. They came from up in Pennsylvania, Oil City, and he had a great-grandfather that was the oldest living person owning oil wells up there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we stopped there about a month ago, and found all kinds of information in the library about where all his relatives are buried. Couldn't find them. We looked in the cemetery, but we'll have to go back one day. But yeah, and there was an oil spill in the river, and his grandfather, let's see, I'm trying to think. I think that you could make about maybe 13 cents an hour labor, and the grandfather went down and he scooped up oil for one day. It was worth $2,500.
Wow.
He became very wealthy. And there's actually a cove in the river there called the Moran Cove. And so we've gained a little history here and recently. I've got to get that paperwork. The person at the library printed everything. They had a folder with Moran on it.
Wow.
In their archives, and she brought the folder, and I said, I'll pay you to reproduce all that paperwork. So Nancy and I have got to put it together, but it's quite interesting. So anyway, they came to, I don't know how the father wound up in Frederick. I think it had to do with Margaret was also his mother's name, as well as his wife's name.
Okay.
And I think somehow there was a connection there with the mother who came from Frederick. But one time I was bear hunting. I took Bill bear hunting up in Ontario. And as we're driving into this area, just sort of flat plains with wheat growing, Bill said, he said, my father used to have land right around in this area here, Well, that was just a comment he made. So his father probably was pretty well off, and
okay.
I know that when they moved to Frederick, they were well-known people.
Okay.
And so Bill was a little bit of an outlaw.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was times when his mom and dad wondered where this kid come from,
Wow. So the farm they had a farm. Was his dad employed otherwise, or was the farm kind of the thing?
He became a farmer, and they just raised the cows, and I don't know. I guess they had some beef cattle too at one time. It's a 150-acre farm, and they hayed and did everything farmers do, and sold their milk. But I think they had I know for a fact they had some money in the bank. They had some stock, and probably were able to live a pretty nice life there. Beautiful, beautiful house. If you're looking in the books, you'll see the home. There's pictures of it there, and I was over there, and she gave me a tour. It's like 23 rooms. There's, I don't know, many, many kitchens in there. But we went upstairs, and we went up into a turret. You'll see a turret way up in there. And I was standing there, and there was 2 eye hooks on the beams, one on one side of the turret, one on the other. And Mrs. Bartlett says, "You know what they were for?" And I said, "I haven't a clue." She says, "Well, Bill used to have a hammock, and he would come up here, and he would sleep at night in the hammock."
Oh, wow.
In the turret. And the reason being is he liked to chew tobacco and smoke cigars. And his mother didn't like him smoking cigars in the house. So that's where he spent his evenings, up there in a hammock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of. When you stand there and look at it, you kind of chuckle, and you look at it and say, oh, my God, unbelievable.
You just imagine it, right? We have we actually have a turret on our house, and
do you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never thought about putting a hammock up there. That'd be fantastic.
You have to get yourself a couple hooks and put a hammock up there for yourself.
Yeah, we'll see what the wife thinks about that.
Yeah,
I got a feeling it won't fly.
So, Jay, when did they sell the farm?
Well, Bill. About 1959, I believe is the correct date. Yeah,
and that's really
they bought a nice house up in Braddock Heights, and Bill's shop started about 1960. I think he completed in 1961, and that's about a mile down the hill from Braddock Heights. And Braddock Heights is an interesting place. Back in the early days of Roosevelt, when there was no air conditioning, it's quite a high plain across there, and people would come from Washington, and they owned many of those homes along that stretch up there because the wind was always blowing. It was very cool in the summertime. They actually had a little ski slope there, and they had the oldest roller skating rink, wooden roller skating rink in the world.
Wow.
Was there. And some kid burned it down.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Oh, God. I think he went to prison. But, yeah, he touched a match to it. I roller skated in it. It was pretty neat. It's the oldest one in the country.
Check that out.
And some nice restaurants, nice hotel restaurants up there. And Now most of those big buildings are apartment complexes, but there's still some very beautiful homes along that stretch of Braddock Heights up there.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
I want to touch real quick, Jay. There's two books I used, and you said there's actually a couple other books, but the two books I've used for this was Master of the Forge by B.R. Hughes and C. Houston Price. And then the second book, which just came out, is William F. Moran Jr., Forever a Legend, and that's by Francisco Paci and Steve Shackelford. And these two books are awesome. And if anyone is interested at all, you guys have a really good sale going on your the website for the museum. You can get both of these for $100, which is a great deal. But when we're talking about the shop, one of the things that I really found cool was in the Forever a Legend book, there's a bunch of the catalogs. And I kind of geeked out reading the catalogs that Bill had, and the first one was for that first shop. And it's so cool. I mean, he's already got, like, if you read this catalog, he's got his style is already starting, and he's got a full line. It's just really neat.
What year is it from, Tom?
So it's 1960, and at the time, it says in the book that only Ruana, which would be Rudy Ruana, and Bo Randall were the only other two knife makers he knew of that had catalogs, printed catalogs.
Huh.
So they
were pretty elaborate catalogs too, weren't they, for the time, when you think about it?
Yeah.
Bill had a lot of models, and I know I told the story many times of knives in his shop where it was $35 really early on, and when he first got there in the early 60s, and that was a lot of money for a knife back in those days, but it wasn't out of reach for most people. And a lot of guys were sorry they didn't spend $35 and pick one up, you know.
Right.
And you could add a couple zeros to it by now.
Right.
Yeah, he had 15 models.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it the Cinquedea?
Cinquedea is the way I say it.
Okay. Yeah, that was even in that first catalog, which I find, very iconic for Bill Moran, because he made many of those over the years, and I don't know that I've seen another one made by another maker recently.
A couple of guys have replicated them that I know of, but in more recent years. But they're a very difficult knife to make. Cripes have got 100 parts to them or something like that.
Wow.
And, Bill was really concentrating on art knives. You got to credit him for that very early on. That's where he wanted to go. He wanted to see bladesmithing become an art form, and I believe it has, especially in today's world. You look at everything. Even I'm not talking just bladesmithing. I'm talking stock removal too. A beautiful art form out there.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I know we're going to talk about Damascus later on here, but my God, you look at what's being made today. It's just blows your socks off.
Yeah.
So in 1960, he's 35. He's got a pretty established catalog. He's obviously been making for quite some time. How did he get hooked up with Gun Digest and get some of that exposure that he got in the 60s?
Well, he was written up by Peterson, who was a Smithsonian person, and got some publicity there, and that was a pretty good book that came out. And I think that people in the knife field started reading about that stuff, and he met Ken Warner. Mm-hmm. Ken Warner actually moved to Middletown, Maryland, just to be close to Bill for a while, and Ken wrote about him, and pretty soon B.R. Hughes is writing knife magazines or periodicals and what have you, and Bill was a guy. There wasn't that many around, at that time that had any notoriety, and it just took off. National Geographic did an article on him one time. He's all kinds of all kinds of articles, early articles on Bill, and up went the prices. He was well looked at. He was a man ahead of his time.
Yeah.
His knives, his styling was so different to the eye, of most people, and he was doing it every day, and the orders started to come in. I know I had mentioned before, but one time after his death, I was going through this card index, and Bill used to say he had 40 years of work to do, and I thought that was very uncommon. 40 years, I'm not going to live that long, And I reached back into a card index about halfway back, and I think the number was like the order was 714 or 40, something like that.
Wow.
And I looked at it and I said, my God, well, people would call Margaret, and Margaret would say, well, I can't, Bill's never going to get to your knife. He's got so many orders. Well, I want to be on the order list anyway. So they'd make another card just so the collector could say he had a knife on order with Bill, I guess. But,
right.
And we got that whole card index. I'd like to computerize that thing one day. It is very interesting,
Oh, yeah.
Most guys that really get busy get behind maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. I've known some that have been, you'd have to wait 7 years for, but most makers can 6 months or something like that, but you're talking 40, 50 years of orders. It's unbelievable. And of course he had no one, he worked by himself. He could have very well taken in a couple of workers and pumped them out, but he didn't. He worked by himself. Nobody else ever worked in his shop, just himself. I never worked in his shop. I was there often, His friend Barney Barnes from Hagerstown. Barney is a great old friend, knew Bill back in the 60s. Barney never worked in his shop.
Yeah. We
tried to get Bill to make knives for us. Never could get him to make us a knife. You guys are knife makers. Make your own damn knife. This kind of stuff. I wanted to get another knife so bad. Well, he did give my wife a beautiful knife one time because she helped Bill and Margaret do bookwork when they started to get old, and really take my hat off to Nancy. She did a lot of work for him. Even after Margaret passed away in 2001, Bill passed away in 2006. Nancy did all his bookwork, all his checks, everything.
Wow.
So she gave him some jewelry and also a beautiful little knife that she owns from Bill. So
wow.
He was very generous that way. Yeah.
Do you think that it was a point of pride to do all that work himself? I mean, you hit on the point that he did everything himself and he didn't have other people in his shop, which could have been pretty lucrative for him. But do you think it was like his name's on the knife, so he's going to make every part of the knife?
He wanted sole authorship for sure.
I can understand that.
And made all his own sheaths. A lot of knife makers have other people make their sheaths. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Knife makers have other people do engraving for them and et cetera, et cetera. No problem. As long as the customer knows what he's getting and wants that. But Bill was the other way. He wanted to do it all himself, I mean, even Randall, Randall's knives are beautiful knives, but Randall's got 25 guys working for him down there. And it's just a different industry. No problem with that either. But they got to make a couple hundred knives a year for different clients out there, different stores that they've got contracts with. Bill was his own man, and that's the way he wanted to do it. And he didn't always work on knives, He would go off on tangents, make other things, but he'd come back to it and became famous irregardless.
What do you think pushed that, him becoming so famous? And besides, obviously they were great knives. He had some, notoriety with some of the publications. What else do you think pushed him into this sort of greater atmosphere than the rest of the knife making community?
I don't know. There's got to be a whole combination of things. Bill was a very personable fella. Ken Warner once said he was very easy to like, and he would kind of pull you into a conversation, and you just felt very comfortable with him. He was doing a lot of shows. He had the exposure. He had the write-ups. Didn't really have to advertise, but he had those nice catalogs he could send out to people. People would come from all over just to come to a shop to say hi and to meet the man. And of course, the ABS was taken off, and he got a lot of publicity through that. He was teaching out at the school. Actually, they pulled him away from teaching out there at the basic bladesmithing course because people wouldn't go to school unless they could be taught by Bill. And
right.
So therefore they wouldn't sign up. So they finally talked Bill into just teaching Damascus and letting the other master smiths teach the basic. It worked fine. Bill didn't like it so much, but it worked fine. Because he really liked teaching the basic more than even teaching Damascus. Well, basic was 2 years course, and Damascus was only 1 week. So anyway, people just wanted to have Bill be their buddy, I guess, and get an order through him. And anyway,
kind of a combination of stuff sounds like.
A whole bunch of things like
the taking
that.
off of the ABS, a very charismatic personality, obviously doing beautiful work. Clearly not afraid to travel, right? To do a bunch of shows and meet people, and maybe all of that just kind of adds up. Yeah.
All of the above, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring this back around a little bit. We've talked a little bit about your history, Jay, and a little bit about Bill's history. And we could go back and kind of talk about how you two kind of met and how you got to be kind of a big part of his history yourself.
Well, when I started making knives in 1972, I had heard about Bill, and so I went over to his shop and met him, and I could only get over there on Saturday mornings because I worked full-time, and I would do that most Saturdays, and actually, my wife went over and bought a sharpening stone from him one time and gave it to me as a Christmas present. And then I think probably the year after that, she was able to talk Margaret into having Bill make me a knife for Christmas. And after that, we became very good friends and started to hit it off. And he could see my interest in smithing, and I'm assuming that anyway, because he sort of took me in. We became quite good friends and started to hang out together. And he was interested in archery, and I'd always been a bow hunter, so we started shooting bows all the time, and just enjoyed talking knives most often. His Saturdays was pretty much consumed by people stopping in the shop and shooting a breeze and talking about many subjects, but mostly about knives and what was happening in that industry. And so it just kept materializing and became closer and closer. And his wife and my wife and Bill and I would go out to dinner different places in Frederick and just became very, very close to him. And of course, after I got into forging, then we really had something to talk about all the time. And I was always taking my knives over and showing them, have them look at them, tweak them, and what have you. And of course, I was watching him make everything too, making the Damascus in the shop and standing there and watching them. And he just enjoyed company. Absolutely. I'm sure that probably during the week it was kind of quiet around there many days for him, but the weekends were always quite lively.
Yeah.
And
so, Jay, you guys moved to that area where he is. What kind of time frame was it when you? I mean, you lived there for a while before you even realized he was there, right?
Yeah, I moved there in 67.
Okay.
67, yeah. Yeah. And I never met him until 72. I think I knew about him before that, but I actually physically went over and met him in 1972, and that was right about the time I started making knives. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that it was kind of like you realize, oh, this knife maker guy, he's just over the hill from me. Right?
You know, it's funny. I used to go down there on a Saturday morning, and I'd actually be nervous. I was just so excited to be able to walk in his shop and sit there and talk to him. And most generally there'd be someone else there too. But jeekers, Christmas, that guy was so smart on things, and he knew so much about bladesmithing that I was just starting to understand, really.
Yeah.
And again, I just consumed about everything the man ever said, and matter of fact, after he passed away, and I was president of the society we started, I used to come upon issues and problems and that I needed to solve, and all I needed to do was so easy. All I needed to do was just sit back and say, what would Bill have done? I always had the answer. And it was always very easy. Our minds thought together like that, and very conservative thought process. And I never had a problem making a decision. All I'd have to say is, what would Bill do?
Yeah.
And I always knew what he would do. It's like that today. I have a good feeling for that, Yeah.
I think not everybody has that kind of person in their life, right? But lots of us do, where it's like there's either a relative or a friend or somebody who really has their thoughts in the same kind of place as you. And, like for me, it's my grandfather, and I'll think, what would he do in this situation? And
well, he's like a big brother to me,
Yeah, there you go.
I think of my father, but I think of Bill also, the two very important people in my life,
Yep.
As well as my wife and mom and everybody else. But,
yeah, don't leave Nancy out, Jay. You're going to get yourself in trouble.
No, she's over there in the corner listening
to me. She starts throwing a wadded up pieces of newspaper at you. You're getting off the track.
So when did Bill start experimenting with Damascus and trying to rediscover what goes into creating Damascus and pattern welded steel?
I don't know when it was first on his mind, but I know he started fooling with it and playing with it in about 1969. And I've got a book that he kept records on, and it's kind of interesting because he didn't really know what to do. There wasn't anything written on this subject. He just started fooling around. But he knew from working on the farms and working iron that you could weld steel, weld iron to iron. So he understood that there was a concept there. And of course, he was a prolific reader, like I mentioned earlier. So he was able to probably get some information someplace on the Merovingian knives that were made years ago and the Vikings. And he knew that existed and was able to read someplace about that. So he knew Damascus had existed elsewhere in early times. He also knew that Mueller, who was the bladesmith for Hitler, made daggers for the Third Reich and for Hitler's bodyguards and what have you. And he actually wrote them, but he never got an answer back. He probably wanted to pick his brain, find out how he did it.
Yeah.
So he was on his own, and so from 69 to 73, when he first really introduced Damascus to the world, reinvented it, you could say, at the Knife Makers Guild in Kansas City, and nobody really knew what it was, in this country anyway. And he took eight knives to that show and sold them all. He sold a beautiful ivory Damascus to Butch Winters and Rita Winters. They were collectors, and that was the first Damascus knife sold. And
wow,
people just were in awe of what was on Bill's table. And Margaret had a whole stack of papers printed up that showed exactly how Damascus would was made. So when customers would say, well, how you do that? She would just hand them this piece of paper, and all you had to do is read it. We've got copies of it today, and it tells you exactly how Bill made Damascus. Man, that was it, boy. It just took off from there.
Yeah.
And Don Hastings got making it, and Bill Bagwell got making it, others. And everybody got trying to do it, But he would start out with just two pieces, a piece of iron and a piece of steel. And, of course, he just used cold forge. And iron will take a higher heat than steel. So what would happen is with two pieces, sometimes you'd be burning the steel and not the iron. And that would ruin the billet. So then he decided that, well, what I got to do is I got to put iron on the outside and steel in the middle. So he used three pieces. And that way he could bring the heat up, because I don't know what temperature that's at, but it's probably 2,600 degrees. It's almost where your metal just starts to spark a little bit. Your metal melts at around 2,700. So you're really up there in the heat, and you got to really watch. And you're doing it in a cold forge. And can you imagine? I mean, smiths today can do it in a cold forge pretty easy because there's so much information about how to do it. But back then, a little bit of a challenge there to get that heat just right. Because in a cold forge, you may all know that the heat looks like it's about a foot wide, but really the intense heat is only about 3 inches in the middle. So you got a differential heat going on in that forge. So you got to have the billet in the right place, and it's got to be the right size. You can't put a great big chunk in there. You got to put something maybe about 3 inches long. 3 to 4 inches, I would say, would be probably the max that you would want to play with if you don't want to ruin it. And so Bill had to walk himself through all this trial and error and keeping records in this little book of how he was doing it. And many times in the book, it'll show where after the third weld, he would add a piece of iron, or after the fifth weld, he would throw in a piece of iron. He would try putting iron in at different places, and what his intentions were is to make a sharp knife, but a stronger knife by adding the iron, a tougher knife. And later on, he didn't do that. He just but mostly he always just used the three pieces, and they were always iron with a piece of 01 and half inch thick by 3 inches. And he made most of this early work, probably all the way up until he started to teach in the 89 and 90, and around in there he started to use more modern steels out at the school. When 15 and 20 come out, and they started marrying that with 1084, and they would build pieces up like they do today, maybe 10 pieces, 15, 20 pieces, thin pieces. He got doing a little bit of that, but back in his own shop, he basically just used the old method of three pieces. And what's very interesting, you didn't have to heat treat those, that when you got done. You didn't have to temper it. You just heat treated it, and it had the right mix of iron, the carbon in the iron and the carbon in the steel, that you didn't have to temper the knife, and cut like the dickens. It was a pretty good technique for sure. Yeah.
I'm curious if you may or may not know this. What was the price of that first Damascus piece he sold?
I don't know. I don't know what they sold for. I couldn't even wager a guess. I'm thinking 1973. You're probably talking $3,000 anyway. I'm just guessing, throwing a number out there.
Yeah.
I know he was doing the Art Knife invitational shows later in life, and just a regular straight steel knife would be $5,000.
Yeah.
For an art knife. And
wow.
Yeah.
So do you think this? It sounds like the pursuit to kind of revisit the whole idea of Damascus steel. It kind of sounds like one of these. I want to try to do it to see if I can do it, kind of a thing. Was that?
Oh, I'm sure the curiosity.
Yeah.
Sure. You don't like to fail. And
Right.
there's many failures in Damascus steel, especially with coal. Oh, gosh. I don't know. I when I was using coal, I probably get one out of every 2 or 1 out of every 3 that would work for me, you know.
Yeah.
You get done, you got 384 welds and jakers. I remember one time I went in Bill's shop. He had a big knife, big camp knife, and oh my God, he was mad. He was swearing. Oh, geez. He says, I've worked 20 days on this knife, and look at. Well, what happened is he was grinding it down, and right at the tail end, he just hit a coal shut, and it just ruined the whole blade for him, you know. And so one weld, and the whole process of a couple hours work was not the right temperature, or he got a little slag in there, you know. So it's so, boy, you can do everything right 9 times, and the 10th time something goes haywire and you lose it. Now, in today's world, a lot has changed because now we got the gas forges, a very constant heat, you know, 2,400 degrees probably max, clean, no soot. You can brush the scale off easily. You can recover if you think you have a problem. Much more success in gas forges than coal.
Yeah. So it was really kind of a probably a combination of things. It sounds like one, you know, I think Damascus steel has this sort of long living legend, right? It goes way back to ancient history kind of time frame.
Oh yeah, the Crusades.
Right.
Yeah,
so
way back.
There's this very deep history, which it sounds like, you know, major history interest on Bill's part. So maybe that piece of it with kind of the legendary aspect of it combined with, gosh, maybe I think I want to figure out how to do that, right? So the curiosity piece and maybe those two coming together was kind of his motivation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think early on, Damascus was probably someone just stumbled on it because they would get the iron bloom, you know, and melting down the sand and what have you, and folding it, and then they'd see a little pattern to it. So, but I think that was just happened. I don't know as if anybody was that smart those many years ago to know exactly what they were doing.
Right.
But Bill certainly perfected it. We've got some beautiful displays in the museum of his work. Look at the knife on the cover of the Legends book that we just did. That ivory handled knife there.
Oh yeah, that thing's stunning.
Yeah, the Quillian dagger.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was my knife.
Really?
I own that. Yeah.
Wow.
Beautiful. I don't have it now. The society owns it, but yeah, beautiful knife.
Wow. Okay. Would you guys want to hit on anything else here relative to the Damascus thing, or any other questions for Jay about it before we keep going?
Well, I have a question real quick. One thing you mentioned, Jay, was the letter that Margaret used to take to the shows. When people would ask, she would actually hand out that typed up letter. I really think it's neat that they shared that, because I think that's one of the things that's really cool about our industry. It seems like we're willing to help, even though we might have some technological advantage or whatever. It seems like that's a really cool thing.
Absolutely. Good example of sharing information. And I think in our society, ABS, it's pretty neat. You know, if you got a problem, you can call somebody and you'll get a lot of opinions and a lot of help out there, you know. I don't know of anybody that holds back information in today's world, at least within our society. I've always been pleasured to know so many guys that would share information with you. And, you know, there's many ways to skin a cat, too, you know. There isn't always a right answer to any one thing, you know. People make knives differently. And yeah,
For
to
sure.
each his own, you know.
Mhm.
Does your society still have a copy of that original?
Oh my Lord!
letter?
Yeah, I got many copies of it. Yeah, I've reproduced
so
it.
cool.
We used to give it as a handout when we have a hammer-in down at Moran shop. We'll sometimes give out a little information, you know, as a gift, and that's generally a piece of paper that goes in the folder for people. Yeah.
Very cool.
We were kind of talking, Jay. It'd be really cool. The guys were saying it'd be really neat to have like a big poster looking print of that as like a poster hanging up in the shop. That'd be pretty neat idea.
Well, we're developing things like that right now.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, we got a nice big picture of Bill that was donated to us. Oh my gosh, it must be 4 foot high, 3.5 foot high by about 2.5 foot wide. Picture of Bill holding a Bowie knife in his hand, a painting, an oil painting. Yeah,
Oh, really?
Nice. Yeah, really nice.
Check that out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's our vote, Jay, for merch for the museum.
Right.
Is the Damascus instruction letter turned into like a wall poster for the shop?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe with some of his knives as artwork.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
Oh, yeah. Even
Well,
a
I know Bo
catalog.
Randall. I think I heard recently that they have a museum in Bo's old house down there. I know they had. I visited there one time. They had one in their shop, which was kind of nice. And of course, we're going to have. We have one now, and it's just going to get better and better. So, you know, when you look across the country, we've got that museum there in Little Rock, Arkansas, the ABS museum down there. That's very nice.
I need to
We're
go
going
to
to have
that.
one in Frederick, Maryland, too. We don't leave things out, you know, because we're afraid of pilferage, but the only thing we don't leave out is knives. You know, we take the knives, we put them in a safe, but we take them out when we have a get together. You know,
Yeah.
Very
Very
some
cool.
kind of an event.
Tom, how far are you from Little Rock?
It's about 3.5 hours.
Okay.
So it's a day trip.
You could ride your bike there.
Yeah, probably not my bike, but I could drive there easy.
That's a nice museum down there. I've been there many times. Arkansas Historical Territorial Museum, something like that. The title is, and it's easy to get to. It's just off the major highway there.
Right. And
Well
Jay,
put together.
I think I met you once or more than once at the Little Rock show. You used to come to that, correct?
I never set up a table there, but it was always when I was down teaching, so I would stop by for the day.
Yeah.
And
Seems
just
like you
kinda
taught
wander,
maybe some silver
kind of wander
inlay.
around. Yeah,
Very cool.
that was a nice show they used to have there.
I don't even remember what shows are like this year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Different times this year for sure.
Yeah.
So as we move forward, we're coming toward the Knife Makers Guild. And what was the impetus toward the founding of the Knife Makers Guild?
Well, boy, that's a interesting question. I don't really know how that first started. I know some of the people that put it together. I know Bill was not involved with that initially, and he joined a year later after it started, and became the president after Loveless. But I don't know where it really first began. I don't know whether it was a show or just the guys got together and 5 or 6 or 8 of them and decided to found the guild. I really don't have information on that.
Okay.
I was a member myself for 25 years. I'm no longer a member now, but
So we
it's
had
a good organization. I used to tell knife makers when I taught that belong to both organizations. Get in a Knife Makers Guild, and it had its peak. Boy, I remember when Frank Centofanti was president down there. What a show! We used to do those shows down in Florida. He put on a class act, and But it took me a long time to get in the guild because they were only taking in 25 a year, and it was like 25 had to leave for 25 to get in. It was kind of controlled. And it took me 6 or 7 years to become a member of the guild, and it's no longer like that. They changed those rules now, so.
Yeah.
And I think the guild's probably building back up again. They're having a show in Texas. Jerry Moran puts it on, I understand, and I don't know how well the show is attended down there, but they went through some rough times for a while, but hopefully it's coming back.
So I think we had in our notes that the guild was formed in 1970, A.G. Russell, and it said we have it at Tulsa. I assume that must have been a group of makers at the Tulsa show talking about it.
That I do know, yeah. At the Tulsa show?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know where it was formed.
Yeah.
I just learned something. I did know AG was involved and Loveless and
right.
Pew was in there and a couple other guys. Yeah.
Okay. So on our notes we had that the guild was formed in 70, then in 71 they met again in Houston and kind of expanded things, and that's probably, it sounds like, when Bill got involved, was somewhere in that 70-71 time frame, right? And then it looks like he was elected the president of the guild in 72. And that's around the same time that you met him, right?
Right. I think they called him secretary at the time.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, and then we talked already about him taking his first Damascus stuff to the Kansas City show in 73, right? And that was the first time that stuff came out. And then one of the interesting notes that we made was that there were less than 10 active bladesmiths in the U.S. in that kind of time frame of 73, which is kind of weird to think about compared to how many guys there are today doing this.
Yeah, there wasn't many. It was a dying art, really.
Yeah, right.
Sort of speaking. And not much interest, apparently.
So the Damascus thing, it sounded like kind of set some people on fire, right? And got them interested in running with that.
Well, yeah. I think it was taken off before Damascus, though, to a degree.
Okay.
As far as, maybe not so. Bill had a tough time through the 60s because I know he was always telling me how much he was doing other things other than making knives. But, 70s, maybe Damascus was the answer because certainly the ABS didn't really form until 76. So that's 3 years later.
Yeah.
And so there was no organization in 73 of bladesmith, and it was just BR and Moran that got talking about, hey, maybe we ought to do our own thing, and it finally did work out, and we got two other guys interesting, Don Hastings and Bill Bagwell, and the four of them formed the society down there in Louisiana, and boy, it just took off after that. Membership started to occur, and then we got ourselves into the 80s, and we decided to do our own schools, our own show in Tulsa. 70, that was 84 and 85 and 86, and then we went down to the Blade show down in Knoxville and did that one. We were, we had journeymen, we had masters, and Bill and I started doing the forging demonstration outside. I got a video of that. I was watching it not too long ago. It's kind of cute. Bill and I forging knives out by the entrance, and lo and behold, we did that I did it for 25 years. I did it 5 years after Bill passed away at the Blade Show. And we'd get a couple hundred people out there watching us, and new membership would come from that.
Right.
Kept growing. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to guys that have watched forging in the stands who became master smiths. And first time they'd ever seen anybody forge. And all of a sudden, a few years later, they're master smiths. One of them's on the board of directors today that got his start by sitting there watching Bill and I early on at the Blade Show.
That's really
interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
You mind letting us know who that is, or is that
Bill Wiggins? Bill
Very
Wiggins
cool.
Bill Wiggins.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we've talked on our show a bunch of times about this, the concept of a family tree, right? Like a knife maker family tree where, the branches all go back to different people in the timeline. And it seems like, Moran is probably one of the ultimate points in that family tree of knife makers because of his key involvement in the formation and the promotion of the ABS early on, right? I mean, the kind of the beginning of that, and then everybody that came through that ABS path where, it's like if you took a knife maker today that's a bladesmith and you kind of followed their path back to who they learned from and who did their test and who did the test for the guy that they learned from, and you know what I mean? And the vast majority of that, it sounds like, or a huge piece of that goes back to Bill. Like if you trace the lineage far enough, right? It's a pretty interesting idea.
Well, Bill was a guy who everyone looked up to, and everybody wanted a little piece of the action with Bill,
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, he's so kind to everybody that he was so encouraging that even if he looked at a knife that wasn't very well built, he would just say, "Does it cut?" And someone give me a knife to critique, I would say, "Do you really want to know the answer?" And if they say yes, then I dig into it and I tell them what they're really doing wrong.
Right.
Bill was a little more gentle in that area, surprisingly so. He would just say, "Well, keep trying. They're looking better. Every time you show me a knife, they look a little bit better." But he'd always say, "Does it cut?" He needed to do that. And so people kind of liked that. And funny stories, though, he was so generous that way that some people would go to test at one of our shows, or at the Blade Show, let's say, and maybe they wouldn't make it the first time. And the comment would be, "Well, I showed this knife to Bill Moran. He thought it was pretty neat." Well, as much as to say he should have passed. Well, the fit and finish wasn't just right, but something. But that happened so many times that we tried to get Bill to be a little bit more honest with the people and tell them what they'd really done wrong. But he was so encouraging that way. Or the guy would be inspired by his comments and
sure
eventually make a much better knife,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Now, it seems to me like Bill had what I would call a infectious enthusiasm for cutlery. Would I be wrong in saying that? And people really picked up on that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I had a table there at the Blade Show right behind Bill. And this young man come over and sat with Bill, and Bill's talking to him about knife making. And Bill was late to go down to do a little show in one of the rooms, and somebody come up and said, Bill, there's a crowd down there waiting for you." And Bill said, yeah, I know it. And the guy stood there a while, and he's still talking to this young man, and the guy says to him, Bill. He said, "Look, I'm talking to this gentleman. When I'm done with him, I will come down and, one of these two." So he would just hold you right in the palm of his hands when he talked to you. And this man, years later, he came up to me and he reiterated that day. He said, "I couldn't believe it. He was talking to me and he was supposed to be someplace else, but he took time to talk to me." And that was just the way he operated, Yeah. And it was so felt by anybody that was a privilege to be talking to him,
That's really cool, and that fits very much with what you described, Jay, when you were talking about how he had that kind of personality, charisma.
Right. Mm-hmm.
People really appreciate that when you make the time to actually finish a conversation.
Yeah,
or
you walk around the show. Bill Moran walk around the show and stop your table and shoot the breeze with you. My God, that made your day,
Absolutely,
it really did.
I'd say so.
he was the father, you know. He was really looked upon, and our banquets were always a blast. Oh, they were so funny, him and Margaret. Gosh, I wish we had taped them. Oh, I couldn't wait to go to a banquet just to hear him get up and talk. And it was always ad lib. He never had any notes, you know. And he would make mistakes, but they were funny, you know.
Right.
He'd forget something, you know. But no teleprompter, you know, to read off from.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said he would kind of play back and forth with his wife from the audience, right?
Gosh, yeah. He'd say, "Excuse me, folks," and he'd bend down and, "What was that you said, Margaret?" And Margaret'd say, "Well, you forgot to say something, you know." And then he'd get up and he'd say, "Oh, excuse me," and then he'd go on, and everybody laughed like the dickens, you know. Funny, just down to earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Down to earth. You know? Yeah,
that's really fun.
Jay,
I give a pitch. I got to have all kinds of notes in front of me. You know, I got to practice beforehand and make sure I get everything correct. You know,
yeah.
Worried to death about it. He didn't do that. He just got up and started talking. You know, just right off the cuff.
Some people just have that. It's like a personality thing.
Yeah, it's a gift.
Yeah,
Jay,
very natural. You can sense it. You know.
Oh yeah,
you can sense it immediately.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, some people you meet and it's like you've known them all your life and you've only been there a couple of minutes with them, you know, and that's the kind of feeling you got with Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. He always had that display of knives, always beautiful knives, you know. We've got them in the museum now. We've got like 125 of them, I think we just inventoried. And got a couple more yet to do, probably about 130 knives total. And Bill always had 5 or 6, 7 knives in a case, a locked case, and I never saw him sell a knife. He never sold a knife all the years. The first show I went with him was, I think, 84. And from there until 2005, I never saw him sell a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all just display stuff.
Right.
You know?
Just to show off the work and keep the whole thing going and keep his name out there, I guess, right? And then the knives he sold would be orders that he was working on and stuff like that.
Oh, he'd always have customers, you know. He always had some knives. And once in a while, he'd get to the card deck and make a knife for whoever was up next in the card deck. But I don't know. It wasn't much concern to him.
Right.
At that time. Yeah.
That's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, did you want to jump in here with a question?
Yeah, Jay, when we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned that there were some firsts that you wanted to discuss that were other than the Damascus. And so I just wanted to kind of see what those were.
I got this little, I called it the Cat Meow, you know, the little building shops, Bill's shop with a red Volkswagen in front of it. That's the vehicle I went to school with him up there in Rochester many years ago. But anyway, on the back side of it, it says, just a second, I got to put some glasses on. I can't read the darn thing. It's kind of small print. I don't know. Oh, there they are.
I'm certainly familiar with that problem. I know the other guys are going to get there before they know it.
Yeah. Well, let me just read it to you. It's kind of interesting. It says, in this shop, many firsts in knife-making industry were created. These included the first decorated filework, the first differential heat-treated blades, meaning blades with a hard edge and a soft back. That's what that means.
Yeah.
The first silver wire inlay on knife handles, and the first true art knives made in the country. That's a pretty broad statement right there. The first true art knives made in the country.
Yeah.
The most important first was the recreation of Damascus steel, which changed knife making internationally. Mr. Moran celebrated his 60th year of knife making in 2000. That's when Margaret had this made. And on top it says, Bill Moran Bladesmithing Shop, built in 1961. And
wow.
The first to use brass on a knife. Think about it.
That's kind of wild.
That's surprising, isn't it? The first to do file work on a knife.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, how do you think that fits with stuff like the San Francisco knives, Jay? Because those go pretty far back.
Yeah, I don't know. I never did really make a comparison on that. I don't know. I would just say they're making the statement here. It's written in the books.
Right.
You know, I guess you could look into it and maybe dispute some of it. I really don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
I never tried, really.
Right.
I just accepted it.
Yep.
But Bill was making some really fancy art knives, you know, especially when he got into the Damascus stuff. Boy, he really brought it forward, and everybody was copying them, you know. Even me, we're all trying to make these European quillian daggers and everything.
Right.
And my Lord, you look today, you look at his handles, and you look at any of the magazines today, and look at this. Look at the style of the handles. They look so Moranish looking to me. Many of them.
Yeah.
Even from Europe, even from France, some of the people picking up on the lines, you know. And he had a pretty good eye for that, you know.
One of the things you mentioned, the silver inlay, I think is very iconic for Bill's knives. I mean, it's if you see that to me, that's the first thing I think is Bill Moran.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember a comment Bill made to me probably up at the school, and it was the handle sells the knife. And I always remembered that. And so when I do it, and of course I put a lot of silver in handles also, probably I very seldom make a knife anymore that doesn't have some silver wire inlay in it. And it was just a takeoff of what Bill did, and maybe different patterns in Bill's, you know, try to do my own thing. And Bill picked it up by his muzzleloader days when the Kentucky and Pennsylvania rifles that he had a lot of silver in them. And, and then the moon, you know, that was something you see in the early Kentuckys. And Bill made a lot of jewelry out of that, put a lot of moons in his knives, some on the sheaths, you know, nickel silver moon on a sheath, some inlaid, some just attached with pins, welded pins, you know.
Yeah.
And so he taught us that, and oftentimes we'll have a hammer in or something like that, and I'll be asked to do a silver wire inlay demonstration, you know.
Huh.
And Bill did many of those, and Joe Kiesler and Bill and I did one. The last show in Arkansas, I took Bill down. I think it was 2005, year before he passed away, and three of us had standing room only in the schoolroom down there, and Bill was having really problems seeing, so I had to finish up his work for him. He said, I can't do it. And he was trying, but he was not getting there. So we finished it up for him. And Joe Kiesler, it was kind of cute. Joe Kiesler was asked to do a little talk on Bowie knives. So this was outdoors. So he stepped outside, and he had a small crowd there, probably 10, 15 of us stand there. And Joe started talking about Bowie knives. And here comes Bill. So Bill walks up, and someone asked Bill a question. Well, there was some other classes going on, and someone got wind that Bill was outside talking, and the other classes left the rooms.
Oh boy!
And pretty soon, here's a whole bunch of people, probably everybody that was at the hammer and standing outside listening to Bill Moran talk about Bowie knives. Joe just stepped back and let him go. That was so funny, you know. But Bill was having a hard time. You know, he had cancer and wasn't doing so good. But he did all right that weekend. We got him out there, and we actually stopped at Joe and Suzanne Kiesler's on the way home. Stayed overnight with him. Had dinner with him. But yeah, Bill was. There's a picture of him on a motorcycle in our book, and that was the same weekend. And it was a fun weekend. Oh, boy, we had a great time down there. I'm glad I was able to take him down. That was his last trip.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the wire inlay thing kind of came from his love of like muzzleloader, black powder rifle kind of stuff. And so from the Kentucky rifles, I guess, is the best.
And Pennsylvania, Kentucky, yeah.
Okay.
Of course, this is rich country where I'm at right here, near Gettysburg. My Lord, up in the Amish country, there's all kinds of Kentucky and Pennsylvania guns still being made here,
Yeah. That's a pretty cool connection that's where he got the inspiration for doing this on the knives, right? Is from the rifles. And he had built rifles as well. I know you said he had his hands in lots and lots of different stuff, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how many guns he built. I know that's a long time before I met him, back in the 50s and when he was really involved, 50s and 60s, I would say. And that was before my time with him. But I did see him build one in a shop for a guy that bought a kit and couldn't get it to go together. And I brought it over to Bill, one of his friends. And that was all fixed up. Barney Barnes owns that gun today. It's
wow.
Really nice, yeah.
So did he ever do the whole sole authorship thing on those rifles as well? Is that something that he was into, or did he buy barrels from somewhere?
He would buy the barrels. I know that. He didn't make barrels, but all the woodwork and everything. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Wow. Very cool.
I did see a rifle that he made, 348, I think it was.
Okay.
He stocked that. That looked pretty good. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Jay. Mm-hmm. I've heard you mention Barney Barnes a couple times. Is that the knife maker Barnes?
Yeah. His name's Aubrey.
And he is a knife maker?
Oh yeah, he's a master smith. Yeah, he's a good maker too.
So there's a knife making book by Lovelace, Moran, and I think it's Barnes. Yeah. Is that the same guy?
No.
Different guy. Okay.
That's Barney. That's
Barney.
Last
Correct.
Name Barney.
Correct.
And this is a nickname, Barney Barnes. His real name is Aubrey Barnes. They call him Barney.
Okay.
But the guy that did the book his last name is Barney.
Okay. I was just getting confused. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
That's a good book too.
It is a great book.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so Jay, I know we talked about Kentucky and Pennsylvania rifle stuff, but Bill, this seems a common thing. I know the guys here that are on the show with us, Tom and Michael and Sean, they have kind of distraction projects sometimes too, right? That are kind of good for the brain, good for the soul. You got to go off and do something else and come back to what you're doing. And we've talked a bunch of times on the show previously about that, but it sounds like Bill made lots of other stuff too, right? Can you give us some examples of some of the other projects or things that he liked to do or work on? I know you mentioned air rifles or air pistols, and he was into all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, he also enjoyed welding. So he would make, you can imagine a little iron base, maybe 6-8 inches on a table, and he would weld wire together and make it look like a tree. He'd build a trunk, and there's probably pictures. I know there's pictures in the book of some of this, and he would weld these little wires together. And there's one. Nancy has one. Let's see. There's one of what do they call it? Deadwood out there with the grave site and the noose on a limb.
It's like Boot Hill.
And a little fence around it. He would do artwork like that. It was kind of relaxing and fun, I guess. But a lot of candelabras. Gosh, I've seen some. I actually own one myself. I paid $500 for it, and it's got a wood base in the middle, but it's got iron coming off in it with some candles, about 6 of them, and I bought it, and I took it over to Bill's shop one day, and I said, Bill, this certainly is your work, isn't it? Oh, yeah. He said, that's mine. I said, get your stamp out. It wasn't stamped. He stamped Moran right in it for me. So
wow.
My daughter has that now, but he did a lot of that kind of work. But the andirons was really thick metal, maybe inch by inch, real thick iron work for fireplaces, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Huh.
And
there's actually a set on.
he did a whiskey
eBay.
chest. I think there's one of those books got the whiskey chest in it. That is outstanding. He also did a stitching horse.
Oh, really?
There's a picture of that someplace, all wood, and you sit there, you know, and you hold your knife and stitch it. Someplace, one of those books has it. Now the other book is Fire and Steel that you didn't mention. That was an earlier one. The author is Wayne Holter, who has passed away now. But Wayne did that book, and it's a brown covered book, and it's out of print. That's a real. That was the first book on Bill. Before Master of the Forge. Yeah.
While we were talking tonight, I found a copy and
did you
have it on the way? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Oh, you did find a copy. Okay, that's neat. That's a neat one. Yeah.
Tom's a multitasker, Jay. So while we're doing the show, he is in the background Googling away, searching online for whatever it is we're talking about. And inevitably, each show, somebody ends up buying something. It's usually
it comes up with something, huh? Yeah.
Exactly.
It cost me money to do this show.
Yeah, right. The expenses end up being deep because it's like, you know, we'll talk about like Rambo knives or something. Before you know it, they're like all of us are buying Rambo knives. Yeah, or Chris Reeve knives or something.
Yeah.
So he liked making art projects. It sounds like he was also way into like hunting stuff, right? So like, you said shot bow quite a bit, and it sounded like he was.
Oh my Lord, yeah. We
crossbow
shot
too.
Well, I didn't shoot crossbows. He and Barney got making crossbows. I think they made 3. Kind of a fun thing, a whole summer project. And we've got one in our museum. But no, he shot like recurves and longbows. And then I got making longbows, and Bill took such an interest in that. He would come to my shop, and I needed 3 hands anyway, because when I was making them, I was using that old Urac cement, which dries awful quick, you know, and so you got to really put your bow together in a hurry. So Bill would help me with that, and that was kind of fun, and I did that for about, 10, 12, 15 years, something like that. And but we would shoot. Every time I would go to Bill's shop, I had a bow with me, and he had a target set up right there. We would always shoot, like every day that I went there. And after I retired in 87, my wife worked for another 10 years, so she wasn't around. So I would go over to Bill's shop about 10 o'clock every morning. But I'd get out there when she went to work. It'd be 7. I'd go out there, or she'd be there at 8, but I'd be out in the shop 7:30. I'd work about 10 o'clock, then go over to Bill's and shoot the bow, shoot the breeze, go to lunch with a whole bunch of guys, fill up about 2 tables over at the restaurant. They made a lot of money off us.
Right.
They made a lot of money off us until someone complained about Bill smoking a pipe. And that was it. And they didn't treat him right on it. And he walked out and outwalked all that business. The guys never went back to that restaurant after that.
Oh, boy.
Not fashionable now to smoke, but that's going way back when it was somewhat permissible, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the timeline, we talked about the formation of the ABS and really that kind of focus on trying to preserve the art of bladesmithing, right? That was the primary goal, it sounds like, of the creation of the ABS, was to teach and keep that craft alive, right?
Well, you know, when you stand, if you look at something for the first time and you watch a guy take a knife and just take a tree and go slice it right on down, you can't do that with a hatchet, you know? And then if you watch someone take a knife and chop the 2x4 in the rope and then bend the knife 90 degrees or better and it doesn't break, that's impressive.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that whoever makes that knife has got to know a little bit about metallurgy and controlling and heat management and all that. And so that they're in as an inspiration for someone to learn something. And it's easily to teach. I mean, it's just a matter of studying it a little bit. It's not beyond anyone's, capability. And And so when we would do demos someplace at a show, and people who maybe didn't know too much about knives would watch that demonstration, it's pretty impressive, I think. Pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah.
And Bill's knives, oh my gosh. I mean, I clean up knives now they come from all over. I get them from overseas. I get knives from Japan once in a while. Moran knives, got a little rust on them, clean them up. They're still sharp.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. They're still sharp. He had a good edge on his steel and knew how to heat treat and temper properly. And, no Rockwell testers, he didn't go through that. He just knew how to, he had woods right behind the shop, and he would take a knife and just go out there and start cutting with it, make sure the edge doesn't roll, it doesn't chip. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so in any event, it's just impressive to watch that process. And then, of course, once the ABS got going and we come up with the rules on how to test and become a journeyman, become a master, it was dangling carrots out there for people who were interested in this, Yeah. And just so much fun to understand it. You don't have to be a metallurgist. I'm far from that. I got just about enough information in my head to know how to do it,
Right.
And to be consistent.
Yeah.
Jay, one of the things we're talking about right now is performance. And do you want to mention the Moran grind? It's not hollow and it's not flat. It's convex.
It's a convex grind. And Bill always felt it was a stronger blade for chopping, not quite like a hatchet, thinner than that, but boy, I never saw one of his blades fail. I just never had experienced it. And we started doing these kind of fun games at different shows. And of course, through our teaching, I know when I taught, if a blade broke, sometimes it was a better lesson than if it didn't break, because you could tell the student exactly what happened and where he goofed up in the process of making the knife, and therein is the lesson on how to do it right. And chipping or rolling, the blade rolling, too hard, too soft, you got to find that middle ground. You got to test your knives, and you got to learn the fire in your environment. The lights in one shop's going to be different than the light in another shop's going to change everything. So in any event, you just learn how to do that properly. And not that things don't go wrong occasionally, but the more consistent you can be, you got your MS on the knife, the more you may appeal to the customer. The customer knows the process you went through to get the masters, and they put the confidence in you, knowing that your blade is guaranteed. If anything happens, you're going to get a new one. It just is a comfortable feeling for a customer to buy a knife that he knows that the maker knows what he's doing.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah, knows what he's doing based on a specific, already defined set of standards, right? That if everybody's meeting those standards, then they can receive this rating, and that makes
when you take the basic bladesmithing course, you actually pass your journeyman tests, even though you may just have joined. It doesn't count as a journeyman, but you actually make a test knife, and you should learn in those 2 weeks that process. If you never go back to school, or go on to Damascus, you should know enough to proceed on your own and to figure it all out. But to become a journeyman, you have to be a member for 3 years and hopefully make a lot of knives. Now, if you do go to school, we do knock 1 year off, so it's 2 years. And then after you get your journeyman and go through that test with a master and take your blades, 5 blades down to the blade show and get those looked at for fit, finish, and symmetry. You pass that test. Now you got 2 more years to go for your master's, and it's a repeat of the journeyman, except this time it's in Damascus steel for your test knife.
So tell us more about the school. You've mentioned it a couple times. Tell us about the bladesmithing schools that have been out there.
Well, we've got one, let's see, I'm not going to remember them all, but we've got one in Maine. We've got one down in Virginia. We've got one up at RIT now, a new one. There's a school in Troy, Ohio. And, of course, we have the school in Texarkana. So there's 5 schools. And, Haywood College down in the Smoky Mountains. That's the 5th one. And, you can look at the schedule, look at the webpage. There's schools there all year long. And you don't have to have any prior knowledge. I had one guy who was just a collector. He just wanted to go to school. He said, I'll never make another knife. I just want to know how to make a knife. And so anyway, we've been doing this since, 88, I guess, was the first school. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many schools we've had over the number of years or how many people have gone through it, but it's got to be thousands, now.
Yeah.
Usually the class is about 12 people in a class. When we first taught it, oh my Lord, I'd have 12 students. I was just the one teacher. It was a really a tough job for 2 weeks. Now we have two teachers. We usually have one master 1 week and another master 2nd week, or we'll double up with a helper. But it's a little easier. But anyway, many people have gone through it. A few women. I had a guy in a wheelchair one time. I think I had a fellow with one arm. Had 2 or 3 women, couple women that become masters. All guys as old as 70-some years old, as well as 20 years old,
Yeah.
And
Great
so
to see.
it's pretty neat, Quite a nice offering. And I used to tell guys, you come here, take your 2-week course. Don't try to make 40 blades, all of them beat up that aren't going to mount to much. Make 4 or 5, do the best you can. Take them home, finish them up, sell them. You'll pay for the course. And many people have told me later on, that worked out fine, So
Jay, the school thing, we had it in our notes that in '86, Bill and BR met with the Pioneer Washington Restoration folks in Arkansas, and
right.
So that facility is really like it's really more of like a historic site thing than doing it like at a university or something, right? That was like a demonstration kind of thing that was part of that historical.
Well, Washington, Arkansas was the last town in the United States at one time. Mexico was on the other side,
right?
Going
right.
way back. Okay, so this is where Bowie met in Houston and all that, and planned the Mexican War, apparently. So anyway, the town is old buildings, been preserved, and the school was built to look like part of the old town.
Yeah.
And the Historical Society wanted to see it happen. And B.R. Hughes, being a dean at Texarkana College, was the one who got the president, his name was Cheesy, to fund it. And Bill had already been teaching up at RIT and doing hammerings around the country, knew what a school ought to be like, so out we went. And they funded it. I think it was like $125,000 to build that barn. And Bill and I went out and we took forge pots out, and we had bricklayers in there, and they put the school together. And so Bill gave a nice presentation to the college right there on the grounds, and it was well received. And So BR really was the one that helped out a lot too. Between BR and Bill Moran, made it happen along with Dr. Cheesy.
Okay.
And so that's how it all went, And so they funded it, and they took care of all the administrations. Was always done by Texarkana.
Okay.
The money went to them.
So at that time, that was on the Washington site, but run by Texarkana College.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. And so Bill taught the first class in that new building that got put up on that Washington site.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Barney Barnes, my friend Barney we mentioned earlier, was in that class.
Oh, is he really? Okay.
Yeah, he's in there.
So somewhere in that same time frame, Bill was inducted to the Blade Magazine Hall of Fame, right? The Cutlery Hall of Fame?
I think that was, I'm going to guess at this, but I think that was about 85, because we were doing the Tulsa show and Bill got inducted, so he had to go down to, I guess, Knoxville to receive that. And he saw the Blade show down there that Bruce Voiles was putting on, and I think Bruce was involved with that show at that time, and Parker was involved earlier too. But anyway, he came back and he told me, he said, that's a really nice show they have down there. Maybe we ought to move our show from Tulsa to Knoxville, and that's what we did.
Huh?
We went down the next year and we did that for, I don't know, until 1990, and then they moved to Atlanta.
Yeah.
So they were nice shows.
So it wasn't until that time frame that Bill had been to the Blade show. That was the first time that he had gone to it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's when he met Bruce and met Steve Shackelford.
Yep.
Was a newly hired employee at the time, and so that was the first connection with those fellas.
Wow.
Those first shows in Knoxville were pretty basic. I mean, the show was in a basement and it was pretty dark. I can remember going my first.
It was.
The first one I went to was the last time they had it in Knoxville, and it was pretty.
Oh,
interesting.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Oh, you've been around a while.
I wasn't making knives at the time, but I did go to the show. And started shortly after that.
Yeah, it was pretty basic, wasn't it? It's as I remember, the floor was kind of hard on the feet. I remember that. Just
straight concrete
floor. Yeah.
And like poor fluorescent lighting. It was kind of crazy.
Well, it had its excitement, though. I'll tell you.
Yeah. It was awesome.
I got to tell you a quick story. Ed Fowler, everybody knows Ed. He always would hang in there, and the show would empty out, and Ed'd still be sitting at his table. So one time I said, "Why don't you get up and get going here?" And he said, "Well, you never know. There might be someone who wants to buy a knife right at the tail end of the show." So the next year I went down, and I set up, and I had a pretty good show. But it had closed, and everybody was leaving, and I just sat there, and all of a sudden these two Japanese guys come up, and one guy couldn't speak any English, and the other fellow was the interpreter, and so Mr. Yamanaka. And Mr. Yamanaka's looking at my knives, and the other fellow, he's picking them up and putting them down, picking them up, and the other fellow that could speak English, he says, Mr. Yamanaka wants to buy these knives. Which ones? He says, all 6 of them. Gosh, Bill and Paul Burke and a bunch of guys were up in the room at the hotel. And I was supposed to be up there having cocktails with them. So finally I went up and, "Where the devil have you been?" I said, "I've been at a knife show selling knives." I told them the story. They couldn't believe it. I sold 6 knives to Yamanaka, and he bought a number of knives years later from me.
Check that out.
Ed Fowler is the one that talked me into hanging around a little while.
Yeah, Ed was onto something, clearly.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So we're getting into kind of the late 80s time frame, and Jay, it sounds like in 1990, that's when Bill collapsed in his shop, and the whole cancer thing was discovered at that point, right?
Yeah. No, that wasn't the cancer. No, that was a different situation. Bill had fell off his deck up at his house. Hit his head. And we went hunting down with another friend of ours down into West Virginia. And we didn't have anything to eat. And it was getting lunchtime. I was really starved. And we were riding around, been out hunting a little bit. And we said, Jesus, we got to get something to eat. Well, Bill was not hungry. He didn't eat, as I recall. And I thought that was real weird. Well, we came home, and a couple of days later, down the shop, I was visiting with him, but I had left. There was another guy there. And later on, I found out that Bill was talking to him. All of a sudden, whatever Bill was saying didn't make sense at all. And Bill knew it. He said, I can't speak, can't talk. And so he went in the hospital. He had a tumor from that fall. And so he had to get operated on. And boy, he went through quite a recovery on that for many, many months. Wasn't doing much at all. Just going to lunch is all.
Yeah.
And so that was different than when the colon problem happened.
Okay. So, it had to be difficult for a guy who spent his entire life working on stuff, thinking about stuff. I mean, he seems like your descriptions of him make him sound a lot like almost like an engineer kind of a guy, right? Like someone that likes to solve problems and almost like everything becomes a puzzle, right? Where it's like, let's go figure this out. And so for a guy that's going through that recovery phase from, his fall and in the tumor, that had to be a hard time for him. What kind of stuff did he do to kind of keep himself sane during that period?
He read. And the fellow that we visited down West Virginia had a house there in Braddock, so he would pick him up and take him down. He couldn't drive, take him down to the restaurant. Well, the same old bunch of guys would be showing up, and then they'd go in the shop, and he wasn't doing any work, but they'd go in the shop after lunch and sit there for a couple hours shooting the breeze, and pretty soon it was time to go home and have supper, So Bill was well entertained, even though he wasn't doing any work. He got through it really, really good, I used to pick him up. We'd take rides out in the mountains, just for something to do.
But that love of reading stayed with him, right? It was kind of part of what he's able to do to kind of keep his mind occupied. It seems like there's a lot of people that learning stuff is it's part of their satisfaction in life, right? And it sounds like he's very much one of those guys.
Like I said to you earlier, he was such a prolific reader. He would go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, regardless of who was sitting in the living room. He'd just say good night, and Margaret would have to entertain whoever was there, And he had these 5 pipes set next to his desk, and they were all loaded with tobacco. So one time I saw that, and I said, Bill, what are you doing that for? And he said, when I get in bed and read, and he'd always fix himself a nice glass with some whiskey in it and some water, no ice, just spring water, and set it there, and he'd light a pipe, and he'd get reading. He said, well, when I finished my pipe load, he says, I don't want to have to stop and reload, so I just grab another pipe. And I always thought that was funny. And after he passed away, the 5 pipes were still there, all loaded, ready to go,
Wow.
Yeah.
Ready for the next day.
I want to back up and tell you a story about Bill, his teaching up at Rochester. Margaret was walking down Market Street in Frederick and met the old professor that kicked Bill out of school, and he happened to ask her, well, Margaret, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. Well, how's old Bill doing? Well, Bill's doing pretty good. Well, what's he up to nowadays? Well, right now, Bill's up at Rochester Institute of Technology teaching. And Margaret said the funniest look come off over this professor's face. They didn't get along too good, the two of them, Yeah. I always thought that was so funny. You'd have to hear Margaret tell the story. It was really very, very cute.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the RIT classes, when he first went up there, it sounds like you went with him the first time that he went up?
Yeah, I went the first time, right?
And so you mentioned that was an NRA thing.
Yeah, they had quite a school up there. There was a real conservative president of the school, and he started classes on engraving and wood work and barrel making and, oh my Lord, all kinds of stuff, all put on by the NRA. It was a summer program. And bladesmithing, they'd already had that, and then they introduced bladesmithing. And oh boy, it was fun and very good equipment and well put together up there for sure. Yeah, and Bill taught there for I think 10 years.
Yeah,
10 years he went up every summer. Yeah.
Does the NRA? Then this is going to sound like a very uninformed question, considering that I'm an NRA member. But is there an NRA? Is there a continuation of that relationship with the knife world? As far as making and teaching?
Not at Rochester. And the reason being is the president retired and a very, very liberal woman took over.
Okay.
And
so the climate at the school changed.
Everything went out the door.
Yeah.
They stopped it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Tom, do you know, does the NRA do knife-related stuff in other places these days? Or is that kind of a bygone thing?
Not that I know of. No,
well, you know, the NRA is responsible for the Harrisburg Sportsman Show.
Okay.
That's put on every year. That's a big show. It lasts a whole week. And, Of course, there's, guides and, campers and canoes and a lot of knife makers there, too,
Okay.
So they endorse that, and they sell tables to knife makers. It's quite a show.
Yeah.
I don't think they're doing classes, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense that the gun and knife industries are kind of arm in arm, it seems like, right? Generally speaking, it's what's good for one is good for the other, right. Because the folks that tend to be into the gun thing, whether it's for hunting or otherwise, are also commonly knife people, right? I mean,
sure.
It's so funny because we'll go to shows, and then if you go to SHOT Show, it's all the same guys that you know from knife shows, right? Plus some gun industry specific people, but it's largely the same crowd. So, I wasn't aware if there was anything still from a class perspective, but it made sense. It makes sense that at some point in time that was very closely tied. Huh. Okay. Yeah. But related to the school climate. So Bill had this tumor, and then he was kind of out of commission for about a year, right? Or was it less than that before he got back at it?
I would say close to a year, it seems to me, thinking back. I know he couldn't drive for 2 or 3 months or something like that. And he recovered fine from it. And,
kind of
cancer is what really got him in the tail end, though, He had colon cancer.
When he came back to it after the fall and the tumor, how did he get back into it? Was he working on new projects or coming up with new stuff when he started back, or just kind of went right back into the groove?
Do you remember the year that he fell? Did you mention that earlier?
We noted that it was 1990, so in 91 we had him back in the
91.
shop.
Okay, I was chairman at that time. I was trying to think. Bill got into making the 50-year knives, got the new stamp, someplace in there that fits in.
Okay.
And he actually did make 50 knives. There is another book that Peter Siemens did on those 50 knives. It's okay. The pictures aren't very well. They're black and white and not too well taken, but it's a good read. And all 50 knives that Bill made took him about a year and a half or closer to 2 years to make the 50 knives, but they're neat. And the little Spyderco. Anybody seen the Spyderco knife, the Moran Spyderco knife? That's a neat little blade. He made a few of those in the 50-year stamp, and Sale
cool.
Glesser from Spyderco still sells that knife. And matter of fact, Sale gives us a couple of bucks for every knife that's made. By contract, yeah, and the fixed blade, the Moran fixed blade, I don't know about today, but for many years was the most popular fixed blade knife that Spyderco ever sold.
Huh.
And I've got one in my hand right now.
It's a neat knife. It really is.
I've got one too.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have the upswept blade or the drop point?
Upswept.
Yeah, me too. To me, that's a classic.
You like the knife?
Of course.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
They're really nice and thin and they feel great in the hand.
The only thing I liked about it is when they first come out, they were in a leather sheath. But for some reason, they went to plastic.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. And they're okay. But the leather was. If I had one, I would probably throw away that piece of plastic and make myself a leather sheath for it. But
I've got a tear in my eye.
But they snap in there. They snap in there nice. Nothing wrong with it.
I spent the last 3 days making Kydex sheaths.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I probably feel like throwing it away too right now.
You'd think after 3 days straight, one, you wouldn't have a sense of smell anymore, and two, you could be really sick of making Kydex.
Yeah.
So we had in our notes, Jay, that when he kind of got back into stuff in 91, that he was working on a new version of his camp knife. Do you recall that, or?
No, not really. Okay. I know he made the Maryland camp knife, which became quite popular, and he made the Colorado camp knife. And that was his two famous Bowie knives. Bill made a lot of Bowie knives. He loved his Bowie knives.
Yeah.
And but he would mix it up. He wouldn't go on a Bowie trend. He would make one, then he'd make a couple art pieces or a couple hundreds or something like that. So, but over the years, he made quite a few Bowie knives.
Yeah. Tom, did you have
camp knives? He called them.
Okay. Tom, did you have? It seems like when we talked about this before, you had a question about that or a comment about the whole camp knife thing.
Maybe I kind of felt like Bill was one of the people that really made the camp knife popular during this time, because if you remember, in this time, everybody was talking about a camp knife. Blade Magazine had articles on camp knives, and I really feel like Bill started that. And I really love the Colorado camp knife. I love that design.
Well, the thought occurs to me when you're talking about that, in our testing procedures, you got to have the test knife, which is, no more than 10 inches and no more than 15 in total length and 2 inches wide. And that's pretty much a camp knife. So you got all the guys making camp knives just to test. And I know when we teach, right. we teach small blades the first week, but we always wind up making a camp knife and testing it at the tail end of the school. So everybody's getting into that, and most of them will make one and bend one and take one home with them, So we've popularized it through the ABS also. But, a lot of places you can't carry, like in bow hunting, many places you can't carry a gun. So you carry a camp knife of some kind, I've often thought about that as far as getting an arrow off. You only get one shot and, you may miss. Something's coming at you. What are you going to do next,
Right.
You don't have a gun. You better grab that knife.
Well, it was handy, too, if you're bow hunting, you could cut a shooting lane or any of that. If you're doing archery, you could chop some branches out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a knife that I made for myself, and I put a black bear inlay on one side, and on the other side, in wire inlay, I have "No bear gonna get me." Because, you never know.
Right.
And I've often said, boy, if a bear come at me, I don't know, he may get me, but I'm going to get him too.
Right.
I'm going to get him. It's real sharp. And it's, I don't know, it's about a 9-inch handle. It's not, or 9-inch blade, but it's razor sharp. Well, I'll tell you, I'd hit him in the nose so fast. He'd probably hit me in the head so fast too.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's not a test I want any part of, Jay, just to be completely on the record. Knife versus bear, I'll pass. But like you said, if it came right down to it, you got to have something.
Right.
So Bill retired from that ABS chairman position at the board meeting in 91. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's when I took over, 91.
Okay.
I don't think it was 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. Yeah, I think it was 91 I took over, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was because it was kind of a lot, it sounded like, between trying to make knives and stuff that had happened and running the ABS. That sounds like a pretty tremendous task.
I don't know as if it got to him at all. I don't think that was it at all. I just think he felt that he'd spent 15 years at it, and we had a pretty good board to pick from, and we had enlarged the board, and
okay.
So they picked me to do it.
Okay.
There was a little competition there, but I wound up with it.
Yeah. So he felt like he did his part and it was time to hand it off to somebody else.
Oh, he was very active even after that, I mean, as a board member, he was very active all till the end, really.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful.
And so in 96, we have on our timeline that he was inducted to the ABS Hall of Fame as part of that first group of makers to go into the Hall of Fame.
Right. So at that time, he was the only person that was in both Hall of Fames.
Ah, okay.
There's been a few added. Jim Batson got it recently, and he's in both. And Joe Keister just got inducted in the Knife Makers Hall of Fame, so he's in both. So there's 3 guys.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So it sounds like the ABS Hall of Fame, there's actually a location. There's like a Hall of Fame display or it's kind of a key piece of the museum. Is that right?
Oh yeah, it's very interesting. They got a computer there that you can click in and pick a name, and up the picture comes and the history, like myself, and around the top of the room there's pictures of all the Hall of Famers, and there's knives hanging by wires, and there's knives in cases, and initially there's a whole board of master smiths were asked to donate a knife, and not necessarily donate it, but put a knife on display. All the masters own those knives, but they're a real nice old display from day one. And I have a whole area down there where we have 15, I think it's 15, might be 10 or 15 Moran knives, and a really nice display of some memorabilia stuff of Bill's and some other things, Man in the Moon, and some other little knick-knacky things that he made behind glass. So that's a nice display we have down there.
Okay.
And then we have 5 more knives that are art knives that Bill had collected. Persian knives and what have you, with jewels, and we've got those on loan down there also.
Okay.
So it's kind of a fun area to visit.
So where is the ABS Museum located for people that want to go check it out?
The ABS Museum?
Yeah.
It's right there in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Okay.
Yep. Just off the highway. It's very easy to get to.
So
you guys all come down, we'll do a road trip.
Yes. We talk a lot, Jay, about going on field trips, the 4 of us, to go see some cool knife things, and we got to add that to the list for sure.
Yeah, it's a nice stop. It's well done. They got a store there too, where they sell different things, and typical museum type store. And there's other displays. Usually there's some rotating displays. I don't, every 6 months something changes to some other item,
Yeah. So in our notes, we had that in 2001. That's when he kind of retired from teaching at the ABS school.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, I know there was this move of the school, right? Did that happen later on?
That happened about maybe 2 years ago is all.
Ah, okay. So just recently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Recently, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when he kind of retired from teaching, that was at the Washington version of the school at Texarkana. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. And the school was renamed the William F. Moran School of Bladesmithing.
Right.
Sounded like that's very cool.
Yeah. Of course, they took the name with them. It's now in Texarkana.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he passed in 2006, right? And
Right.
as you mentioned, he had colon cancer, and that's what actually took him in February 2006.
Yeah.
So really interesting timeline. Lots of huge pieces of knife history included in that timeline that we just walked through. So when Bill passed, Jay, I think you told us before that you were involved in kind of dealing with the shop and his estate and that kind of stuff, right?
Oh boy, what a time that was. Bill had asked me to be his executor, and I said I would be for sure. And he said, "You're going to have a lot of work." I said, "Okay, I'll handle it." And at that time, there was a historical society in Frederick, Maryland called Landmarks, and they restore old buildings like 100 years old, what have you, and they put a big marker on it, and they maintain it. And they also maintain a couple of small museums down there, I believe. And they were entertaining Bill and taking him out to dinner, and they were going to replicate his shop in downtown Frederick at a historical site. And the reason being is Bill's shop is in a floodplain, and we didn't know it couldn't be expanded, and they wanted to expand it to something. And so we drew up plans and thought this was all going to take place. And so Bill passed away, and of course I was working on his estate. And meanwhile, Landmarks took in a new president, and they got a lawyer to write a letter and say they didn't want to have anything to do with Bill's estate when it was closed, because they had too many museums and places to take care of as it was, and they weren't doing a good job in many cases. So the whole thing just dumped back in my lap. Well, the will was written in such a way that it made me responsible. And so I immediately formed a 501c3 organization and started the foundation, William F. Moran Museum and Foundation Incorporated. And so now, as a foundation, picked a board of directors, we now owned his land and a shop. And we had two major auctions, one at his house up in Braddock and then one at his shop on a weekend, and sold so much of his stuff. And but we kept the shop pretty much intact the way it was when Bill last worked in it. And so from there on, the work began. I closed the estate, but went down and looked at the building. The building had no supports upstairs, and the side of the building was starting to move, maybe only a quarter of an inch. You couldn't see it by the eye, but engineers said, if you let it go, the building's going to fall down, in 40, 50 years or something like that. So got some people looking at it and decided that we would start the museum and we would do it upstairs. We couldn't expand because of the floodplain, but we could put it upstairs. So that's what we did. We enlarged it up there, and we put walls in and refinished the whole place, and actually spent about $165,000 on a shop. We had to raise the floor a little bit and put new beams in, and just air condition it and heat. And Bill didn't have anything like that in there. We had no water anyway, but he really didn't have a heat. He had a coal stove. Well, we couldn't keep the coal stove going because we wouldn't be there every day, to stoke it up.
Right, yeah.
Like Bill would. He'd just put a pail of coal on it when he went home, and it'd be still hot in the morning. So anyway, we put a lot into it. We upgraded it from, the amperage, the voltage that went into the place. We put air conditioning units in and heating units, and it's a wonderful facility. It's there forever now. We've got a great security system there, and then we built a pavilion. And the next thing we did is we bought a parking lot that's up out of the floodplain, and we redid the surface of the parking lot for 69 cars up there, all beautiful macadam with white stripes for parking. So when we have an event, we have a place for people to park. There used to be an old Tasty Freeze there, and there was a lot of cement and some wire sticking up out of the ground, what have you. So we had a lot of clearing to do. And then the next thing we did is for the last 2 years, we've been working on a new school there. I finally got it approved just a couple of months ago after 2 years' efforts. And what a chore that was. It's a beautiful school. It's going to be a building 40 by 80 foot long, and half of it's going to have a second floor to it. And the forge is going to be 40 by 40 foot, and we're going to have 8 gas forges in there and a couple of coal forges. I'm going to donate a power hammer and a press that I have in my old shop. I'm about done doing that kind of stuff, and I can use it down there anytime I want to anyway. And so it's going to be a school, and we're getting ready to put together our competitive bid package, and hopefully we'll be starting a new building here in the spring time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's unbelievable. It's going to, we're estimating it to be about $600,000.
Wow.
So you see, we're putting an awful big effort into it, and we're very fortunate. Bill left us some money, and we've invested it, and we've been doing pretty good with that, but not enough to build a building like that. We've got a financial plan right now, drawing in some money. We've got some grant work going on. We had a local company down in Frederick give us $45,000 here about 6 months ago. And so awesome. Things like that are happening, and we just have to get more of that coming in.
Yep.
So it's quite an effort, and we were doing real good. We were having monthly meetings, and we would always be teaching something. And then we have other events where we're actually forging outdoors under the pavilion. We've got like 6 forges. No, I think we got 6 anvils. We got like 3 gas forges we bought. We have a power hammer there. It was donated to us, a little 25-pounder that we use. And, of course, we got the forge in Moran's shop, but you can only have a couple guys working in there at a time.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's a quick dump on what we're up to.
Very cool.
We haven't named the school yet. We've just been kicking around a little bit. I don't know what it's going to be. Whether it'll ever be an ABS destination school, don't know. It will be a school one way or another. Could be the Bill Moran Bladesmith Academy or Bill Moran International School of Bladesmithing. I don't know. It'll be something like that, you know.
That's very cool.
We're looking forward to it, and we'll have classes there of some sort in a couple of years for sure.
Awesome. So you guys are registered nonprofit, the whole deal. So
yeah.
So right. If folks want to get information about the museum or the school or whatever, they can go to www.williammoranmuseum.com.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm looking at the website right now. So lots of information on there, stuff about events and classes, pictures, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So folks can become a member of this to help support that effort, right?
Yeah, we only charge $15 a year. It's not much.
Okay. So
burn that up in newsletters, but you know, we do have shows and we do have auctions, you know, and we make some money that way.
Yeah. And so I think Tom mentioned if you go there, because you know one of the things that kind of has become a thing with the show, and we talked about a few knife books early on. You know, the Sid Latham book and some other stuff. And people really latched onto that, got very interested. And so for people that are interested in purchasing a copy of the Forever a Legend book or the Master of the Forge book, they can get both of those on the website.
Yes, right.
And there's also a forging video in there. Can you talk a little bit about what's on that or what's contained in that video?
Yeah, that's how to make a knife. It's not that long, but it's only about 10 minutes long, and it was a documentary that the Frederick Community College did years ago on Bill, and it used to air on our television sets quite often. And one day I got the idea to approach the community college and see if they wouldn't allow us to use that, and they gave it to us. And so we produce it, and when we have our little get-togethers, we have them for sale for $10, I think they are. But it's neat. It's neat. It's short, and Bill does a little talking there, and he forges a knife quickly, and not the whole process, but just the forging end of it. But it's and of course the ABS has we did 3 videos on Bill. And they're all about an hour and a half long, and they're great. One's how to make a knife, and one is handles and guards, and the third one is Damascus steel.
Okay.
And they're very popular. I think they run $60, $65, something like that. But very, very educational.
I may have bought those too.
So you can see, when you look at the books that we've been talking about, and you look at the ABS and these DVDs, look at the history that's being presented from our society and the American Bladesmith Society for everybody's enjoyment.
Right?
It's great.
Yeah.
And what other knife maker has 3 or 4 books written about them?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we like about trying to do this podcast is part of keeping all of this history alive is continuing to talk about it. Right. And so that when we do history episodes like this one that you've helped us with immensely, the whole point is to keep, in this case, kind of that story of Bill Moran alive and out there for people to be able to hear it. Right. And because if you don't talk about it, it starts to fade and eventually disappear. Right. So we think it's important to kind of keep all that stuff in the conversation and help people understand, right? People that might not know any of that history. And once you kind of turn the light bulb on, who knows, right? Maybe they're like you, they say, oh man, I'll get in. That inspires me to go do something. I'm going to go find I'm going to go take a class or, go to one of the ABS schools or kind of get started in it. We've had lots of listeners from the show who got excited about going off to make a knife from hearing some of these stories from different makers and history and otherwise. So,
well, I tell you, it's a great feeling to walk into Moran's shop and to be able to walk over and forge a knife in his old forge.
Yeah.
That is something that hard to come by.
Right.
Really.
Yep.
What a nice feeling.
All right. Well, Michael, Tom, Sean, you guys have any other questions for Jay before we wrap this thing up?
I'm good.
Okay.
I really appreciate it, Jay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it works. It was fun doing for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a subject that you really can talk for many hours on if you keep going, Right. But I think we covered quite a lot.
Yeah. What's Jay, I know there was a story that you told us about before about a dog story.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that when you mentioned it. Yeah, it's a cute story. Yeah,
it's a good way to wrap up.
Yeah, Bill and I oftentimes went down the C&O Canal. It's a beautiful canal along the Potomac to walk, and people go down there and bicycle ride and what have you. Well, this one day, and this is long before I knew Bill because of the dog he had, a golden retriever. I never knew that dog myself. Barney did. But anyway, he was down there walking the trail with his golden retriever, and some people come by, and this particular dog of Bill's was always wanted to dig, and he would dig on command. And
oh, wow.
So these people said, well, what kind of a dog is that? And Bill said, well, that's a Potomac River worm retriever. What do you mean? And so, oh yeah, he digs worms for you when you're down here fishing. He'll get you some worms. No, come on. So Bill says to his dog, dig a hole. So the dog goes over and he digs a hole. For God's sakes, he digs up a worm. So anyway, the people shaking their heads and they went on, Well, a couple months later, an old friend of Bill's from Washington, D.C. come up to visit him. And he's sitting in the shop, and they got shooting the breeze, and all of a sudden it gets to talking about dogs. And the guy says, "Jeekers, Bill, did you hear about that new breed of dog called a Potomac River Worm Retriever?" Bill starts laughing. "Where'd you hear that?" He said, "Well, I just went to a dog show down in Washington, D.C., and I heard some people talking about this new breed of dog." and Bill says, "Would you like to meet the Potomac River Worm Retriever? There he is, laying over there on the floor." Oh, God.
That's fantastic.
Only Bill could come up with a story like that. That's funny, isn't it?
It is really good. Yeah. Well, and based on your description of his personality, that seems like a fantastic way to kind of top this whole story off, right? It's a good example of humor and thinking on the fly.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, he was a wonderful character to know, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I think of him often, and it's been many years now since he's passed away, but I don't know. He's right with us.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't forget friends like that.
That's right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, Jay, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for offering it to me.
Thank you.
We'll, we have to, before we wrap, we have to thank our friends on Patreon. We have a great bunch of folks that support us through donations through this website called Patreon, and they help keep the show rolling. And so big thanks to them. They stick with us and keep sending us a little bit of money every month to kind of keep the wheels on the bus here, to keep the story going. And so we appreciate that, and we hope shows like this one are what they part of the motivation for them to help support keeping the activity happening. So we thank our Patreon supporters. We have a great discussion group on Facebook where people that listen to the show come chat with us, and a lot of times they'll show us pictures. We have a collector friend that joined us on an earlier episode of the show that has at least a couple Moran knives, I think. He showed us those before, but I look forward to having him share some of that stuff once we get this episode out there, because I know he's deeply in love with those knives. So that'll be a cool thing as well. So thanks to everybody that joins us in the Facebook group. And I don't know. I think that's it. Jay, thanks again for joining us, and thanks everybody at home for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
You're welcome. Good luck with your knife making, guys.
Thanks,
Jay.
very much.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram at msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.